C.S.Nott had a good relationship with both men, between Ouspensky and Gurdjieff. He studied with both men, he was trusted by both men, and he went across from England to Paris and back to see both of them. So I think it's a very interesting book. So I'm going to read out a few sections that struck me. C.S.Nott says, "Some weeks later I was in Paris at the Café de la Paix, talking to Gurdjieff in a worked-up state, and I began to speak rather heatedly of what Orage and I had said about his having brought us so far, but seemingly left us up in the air. You once spoke about people finding themselves between two stools, sitting on neither. Perhaps that's where we are." Gurdjieff listened quietly until I had finished, and with a cynical grin said, "I needed rats for my experiments." "What?" I asked. "I needed rats for my experiments." As always on these occasions, I fell silent. Then he took me to lunch at the apartment and talked about many things. With a look of compassion he said, "You are a good man." "What is good?" I asked. It seems to me that goodness is often a name for weakness. Sometimes I see myself as what I really am, merde de la merde, shit of shit. A slow smile spread over his face. I'll skip on a bit. A few days after the publication of Ouspensky's A New Model of the Universe, I happened to go to Fontainebleau, taking with me a copy of the book, which I showed to Gurdjieff and Dr. Sterneval. Gurdjieff merely made a scornful remark and turned away, and Sterneval began to say that there were many things that Ouspensky did not understand. Mr. Gurdjieff has a very big plan. Ouspensky does not understand this. He does not know what Mr. Gurdjieff's aim is. We who are working with Mr. Gurdjieff have got beyond such books as The New Model. It only adds to the sum of ordinary knowledge, of which there is already too much. Ouspensky ought to have got beyond it. Perhaps he has to get it out of his system, I suggested. It may be. I hear that he is working on another book, an account of what Mr. Gurdjieff said in our groups in Russia. This should be in a different category. I'll skip on. Speaking about Ouspensky, Frank Pinder said, "All that Ouspensky had of value he got from Gurdjieff, and that only with his mind. He had a perfunctory fling at the movements, and even confessed to being lazy. Gurdjieff's main quarrel with him was that he, Ouspensky, thought he knew better and was apt to kick over the traces." Just a side note here. The idiom "kick over the traces" goes back at least to the 1800s and refers to the straps that attach a horse, oxen, or other draft animal to the wagon it is pulling, known as the traces. If an animal kicks over the traces, it steps over these leather straps. This makes it impossible for the driver to control the animal. Further on, Ouspensky said, "You know, when Gurdjieff started his institute in Paris, I did everything I could for him. I raised money for him and sent him pupils, many of them influential people. When he bought the priory, I went there myself, and Madame stayed there for some time. But I found that he had changed from when I knew him in Russia. He was difficult in Essentuki and Constantinople, but more so in Fontainebleau. His behaviour had changed. He did many things that I did not like, but it wasn't what he did that upset me, it was the stupid way he did them. He came to London to my group and made things very unpleasant for me. After this I saw that I must break with him, and I told my pupils that they would have to choose between going to Fontainebleau or working with me." Now here we see Ouspensky talking about influential people, and in terms of Gurdjieff's mannerisms, Ouspensky didn't like the stupid way he did those things. Ouspensky had a self-image of himself and of his people and friends. he wanted to maintain his position, and he didn't like Gurdjieff's way of being. It offended his self-image. Further on, regarding the incident of Gurdjieff's visit to Ouspensky's group in London, Pindar told me that Gurdjieff had been concerned about the approach to the work of some of Ouspensky's pupils and about Ouspensky's own lack of understanding of the real purpose of the work and of Gurdjieff himself, and in the winter of 1922 he took Pindar with him to London and went to a meeting of Ouspensky and his pupils. Gurdjieff told Ouspensky that he was working on the wrong lines. He was too intellectual. If he wished to understand, he must stop and begin again to work with Gurdjieff. But Ouspensky could not take it and got angry. Also, he objected to Pindar interpreting for Gurdjieff, whose English was then no good. But Gurdjieff said that Pindar understood many things better than Ouspensky, that his Russian was good enough and his English better than Ouspensky's. Gurdjieff tried to explain that all of Ouspensky's vast knowledge would be useless unless he worked on himself in order to understand some basic principles, and that without this his pupils would get nowhere. He then got up, and he and Pindar left. On the way back, Gurdjieff said to Pindar, "Now they will have to choose a teacher." If you're like Ouspensky, and you recognize, I hope you recognize the limitation of just endless words, all these endless books that Ouspensky was always writing. He's got a massive bibliography, he just never stops writing, it's like a sewer. Even if you don't understand exactly what the problem is, the best thing to do is to do some inner work, quietly, privately. You don't have to change your whole life, but just begin that other type of work with the lower part of your body, work that doesn't involve your head and your image. You don't have to tell anybody, you don't have to ruin your life, you don't have to quit your job or lose your friends. Just begin, do it privately at home with the door shut. That's my recommendation to you. Personally, I'm not convinced by radical diets of people who want to change everything overnight. I don't think it works. It is better to simply start something good and interleave it with your existing life. You don't have to lose your friends, you don't have to make a great sacrifice, but you do have to begin something good. And in that way, you can continue to have all those pleasures and your self-image and your friends and all the rest of it. But in this meeting, Gurdjieff, says very clearly what Ouspensky's problem is. If it couldn't be obvious, isn't it obvious? These endless, vast tomes that are going nowhere. Now, C.S.Nott says, "As far as I could see, no real tasks were given in physical work, as at the Priory." C.S.Nott is talking about Ouspensky's groups in, I think it was Limehouse, some mansion in England. He says, "As far as I could see, no real tasks were given in physical work, as at the Priory, and no exercises apart from one or two very simple ones. There were no shocks, as Gurdjieff used to give, and it could not have been otherwise. It was a well-run philosophical school, unique in our time perhaps, with nearly 1,000 pupils, and no breath of scandal ever touched it. Sometimes I wish that Gurdjieff could come and throw an essence bomb and wake these nice people into life. Yet how much poorer their existence would have been without the life at Lion Place." So you see here that for all Ouspensky's big words, he is not following the system because he does not do what he was instructed to do. There is no physical work, there are no exercises, and there are no shocks. Therefore, even though in Ouspensky's writings he talks about these things, he does not do them. Do you see? So all these books and these words do not result in the simple following of instructions. Now, if Ouspensky had written all these books, but he had actually followed those instructions the way they were laid out in his own books, if he'd actually done that, things would have been different. Do you see? So it's not that... The problem is exactly as Gurdjieff had described. Ouspensky's words and his actions were decoupled from each other. It wasn't that Ouspensky was decoupled from Gurdjieff or that Ouspensky had a different idea. Ouspensky did not do what his own ideas said. He was a fragmented man. Do you see? So the entire problem with Ouspensky's lines comes from inside of Ouspensky. He wrote lots of words, instructions, systems, but he did not follow them himself. Do you see? And Gurdjieff, Ouspensky talked often of shocks, but he did not administer them. And he detailed the work with the centers, but he did not do any exercises or physical work. So all he did really was to sit down and read. Now, I do not believe that this is particularly helped the teaching. Gurdjieff has already created a pyramid, a mausoleum for the teaching in Beelzebub's Tales. He wrote that book with that aim. The aim was to store the knowledge in a book that would never be lost. It's a pyramid. It will never be lost. It will be there in 1,000 years. And Gurdjieff made many very careful constructions in that book so that it would appeal and it would maintain and it would be carried forever. Gurdjieff had an aim for his books, a real aim, whereas Ouspensky didn't have an aim for his books. He just opened his mouth and lots of words poured out. So much of our life is like that. It is without aim. Even having an aim comes from having the aim of having a family. But these days life is so mechanical that even if you have your own family, does it really reflect you? Or are you simply caught in the mincemeat machine of life? I'm sorry to say that, but it is like that. You know, your kids come back from school and they have been taught all sorts of evil shit by the most degenerate, useless nobodies in society. And that's your family? Terrible. I'll skip on a bit. A year later, during a conversation, Ouspensky said, "It is necessary that we get in touch with an esoteric school." C.S.Nott said, "Do you know of an esoteric school?" "No, but there must be schools either in Europe or the Near East." "But why is it necessary? We have a school." "Where?" "The Priory was an esoteric school. Gurdjieff himself is, so to speak, an esoteric school." "No, I cannot accept that. It is necessary, as I say, to get in touch with an esoteric school." I'll skip on. C.S.Nott says, "Sometime later he gave me a typescript to read, saying that he was writing down all that he could remember of what Gurdjieff had said to him. I may publish it, but not if Gurdjieff publishes Beelzebub's Tales." To my question why, he did not answer. It was eventually published after Gurdjieff's death, Fragments of an Unknown Teaching, which the American publishers stupidly dubbed In Search of the Miraculous. Sometime after my meeting, I was in Paris with Gurdjieff, and at lunch told him about my contact with him, and about our going to his group. He listened and made an unflattering remark about Ouspensky. "Mr. Gurdjieff," I said, "I like Ouspensky and I enjoy talking to him." "Oh yes, Ouspensky, very nice man to talk to and drink vodka with, but he is weak man."